Alexandra Dotcheva is a classical violinist turned registered nurse, investor and martial artist, health freak, and now author of her book, It Really Is Simple, a holistic approach to self-confidence, a practical guide. And she's on the line with us here. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Toby. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing smashing, thanks. So this book, It Really Is Simple, a holistic approach to self-confidence, what made you want to write it?
Mostly the questions from my patients and investment mentees, because I'm very physically fit. I live by personal example with my health. I don't compromise it. I don't compromise my diet and all that. So the patients know it, but they wanted a system, right? Yeah. Same with my loved ones and friends. And then as far as investing, it's nice when people know that you're financially free and you can choose to work or not to work. It's really your decision. At some point, you don't depend on your long hours job to pay the bills. And people got very curious about this as well. So that's how the book came into existence.
Yeah. And I like the positivity of the book as well. The first chapter is called Let's Do This.
Yes, it is. Because I did describe my story briefly as I could, because I needed to tell people why I'm competent in self-confidence and self-esteem building, considering that I fought with poor self-esteem and poor self-confidence for over 2 decades. Until I resolved to switch my mindset, and everything else is now history.
And how did you manage to switch your mindset? Was it easy?
No, it was not easy. I was in violin for 26 years. I earned my master's and doctoral degrees here in the United States. The market for classical musicians shrunk. Orchestra started bankrupting between 2006 and 2009. So in 2008, I decided to put myself through nursing school, even though I had no science base whatsoever, let alone in English, because I'm Bulgarian. I mean, obviously my accent, I haven't been able to overcome that to save my life. But that switch came out of desperation. I realized I was not going to prosper financially. And since my family is in Bulgaria and I was here, I also went through a divorce at that time. It was that same year, 2008, just encompassed lots of changes that were very difficult for me. But that's when you hit rock bottom and there is only one way out. Well, there's two ways out, down or up. So you better choose the way up. And that's what I did. And I reversed my violin practice, which often would be up to 9 hours a day. I started reading science textbooks up to 9 hours a day before I started my science classes with the university that I enrolled into, yet again, after 11 years of being in college, right? Yeah. So nursing, I started in 2011. And then in 2014, I also embarked on investing in real estate. I own 3 real estate businesses right now. And that's what really built the self-confidence, the willingness to fail and learn from my mistakes, which I was dreading before as a musician.
Yeah. And going from a musician to a nurse, that's quite a career change, isn't it? Did you struggle with that?
It was a no-brainer, because nursing was a career opposite of violin, in the sense that it was in such a high demand that I understood I could find work anywhere in the world if I applied myself into the studying and if I were willing to overcome the stress of the new job learning, which was enormous. I mean, my parents were terrified when I told them over the phone from the US to Bulgaria. And my mother says, do you realize how hard nursing is, that you're going to be immersed in human suffering from now on? And you've lived as an artist and musician for 26 years. And are you really going to ditch all the work that you have done so far? And I said, well, no, yes, but I'm going to apply the discipline that I learned from you guys into my new career. I really have to do it now, I said, because 30 years from now, I'm going to have great regrets if I don't do it now. And I was 32 years old. See, in the mindset of my parents, that was old to learn new things, let alone switch careers. And then when I went to nursing school, guess what? There were people who were 46 years old, 50 years old, and they were switching careers not only for the first time, but for the second time they were switching careers. And I realized, so it must be doable. I just really have to stick with it.
And that's interesting that your parents were quite confused by it, because usually it would be the other way around, wouldn't it? That getting a job as a nurse would be a respectable career and getting a job as a musician would be a bit more risky.
No, because both of my parents were musicians. I mean, my dad has passed away, but they got me into music when I was 6 years old, and it was prestigious at the time, okay? So not only were they afraid of my career change, but they also felt very guilty that they had, as they used to say, dragged me into a career that turned out to be very risky and not prosperous, and truly a lot of sense of guilt in them, which I had to help them overcome. But to the present day, my mother, I think she still feels a little bit guilty about the whole thing.
Yeah. I take it your love of the violin originally came from your parents then?
Yes. They played recordings for me of Brahms symphonies, Beethoven symphonies since I was 2 years old. And I started going to symphony concerts at age 3 when my dad had this lucrative job in the Mexico City Philharmonic Orchestra, because we lived in Mexico City 3 years before they made the mistake to go back to Bulgaria during socialism.
Yeah. Even though it's not your job anymore, do you still play the violin occasionally? You haven't forgot it?
I have not touched the violin since 2011, Toby. Since I became a nurse officially, yes, because you either practice or you don't practice. The small muscle memory of your fingers when you play the violin is not the same as learning the bicycle or swim. It's a very different skill. And there is this saying, if I don't practice one day, I know it. If I don't practice a week, everybody else knows it. Now imagine 11 years, right? I wanted to dedicate all the time I had to the things that I felt I had missed as far as knowledge of reality of the real world. And that took a lot of time. So I figured that was it. But I listen to classical music to the present day every day.
Wow. So in terms of the book, why do you think it's important that we have self-confidence?
Because if we don't still have self-confidence, we'll have no self-respect, and we will not instill in others that they need to respect us. I learned this from martial arts quite a bit, because martial arts, I was 12 years in martial arts, and now I'm the fitness freak that you read about. But it teaches you, first of all, self-control. Secondly, self-respect. And thirdly, respect for everyone else. So I have divided life into 5 very essential components, and I have described how I have elevated these components in my life in a very practical and accessible way for people to take advantage of and do this with their lives, hopefully more easily and quicker than I did. And the 5 components are obviously health, spirituality, career, finances, and relationships. And when you elevate every aspect of your life to the point that you have absolute full control over it at all times, with means as independent as possible, then you have holistic self-confidence.
Holistic self-confidence, what does that mean compared to simply self-confidence?
Holistic means you control every aspect of your life. Every element of your life creates the whole. So you don't neglect your health, for example, for the sake of making more money, a lot of money. Because if you're, I don't know in England, in Great Britain, but in the United States, the healthcare system is the first cause of personal bankruptcy. So if you neglect your health for years in order to build this prosperous career or build all these cash flowing assets, but you neglect your health, you will pay for it sooner or later. And all of your finances will go to the junk because of the big bills you'll be paying. A major health event can set you dramatically back financially, okay? And for the same reason, if you're working long hours, you need to learn how to expand your financial means through investing and create these cash flowing assets that are unrelated to a job. So you can stop your job in case you want to stop your job, or you work because you want to keep being useful to people, but it's on your own terms, okay? And then comes the relationship aspect. You got to pick your relationships, who you hang around with. They can be very nice people, not necessarily bad people, but if they're ignorant people, they will likely advise you poorly to make poor health decisions, poor financial decisions, or most likely both. So you need to be very careful who you listen to guide in your life and develop your own independent way of thinking.
Yeah. And once you've got that confidence in you, how do you maintain that? Because
it becomes part of your integrity. You don't compromise your principles. And it's the same exact principle across the board with all these 5 aspects. Once you're able to apply to your health, it transfers to your spirituality, your career, your finances, and your relationships, and back to your health. So it's the same thing across the board, which is also very carefully explained in the book. It's an uncomplicated principle. And once it works, you're not going to abandon it because you only improve on it but you always remember the basics, okay? You don't compromise the basics for the sake of pleasing others or not hurting other people's feelings or for the sake of excusing your own laziness at some point, right? Yeah. So that's a no-no. And that's how you maintain it, because it becomes part of your competitiveness with yourself. You're your toughest opponent, your toughest competitor, right? You can be your best friend or your absolute worst enemy. And Toby, we make this choice every day we live, because we are confronted by situations on a daily basis. When we learn new things, we can decide, I'm going to be my best friend right now or my worst enemy. It's not a set thing. It's not set in stone. It's every day you make that decision. And based on your daily choices is how you maintain your self-confidence in your ability to solve everything that comes along your way.
Could it slip away over time, maybe? Maybe at the very start, somebody's trying to get self-confidence, and then after a little while, they've kind of forgotten about it, and that confidence goes away.
You cannot allow yourself to become complacent. You don't take your success for granted at any given moment, precisely because people tend to be more lazy than they tend to be otherwise. But if you have built to that level, you are aware of that. You know when your mindset tries to slide back into the old habits, you immediately have to wake it up and say, no, we're not doing this anymore. That's in the past. We're doing this now. Sometimes you have to redirect your mind, and it's okay. It's okay, truly okay. The more you challenge yourself, the less redirection your mind will need, because that's how you grow, being a lifelong learner. That's your mind fitness strategy. And you will be less inclined to slide into the patterns that you're describing.
Is there sometimes a fine line between self-confidence and delusion?
Yes. If your self-confidence is based on integrity and measurable results, then it is true self-confidence. All right. But delusion is when you're creating a reality that doesn't exist. You can prove that reality. You can prove your statements. And people see that you're full of BS, right? Because people will see that. It's not hard. As soon as your results are measurable and you can show to people and to yourself, mostly to yourself, I mean, it's all about self-integrity. Yeah. If you don't have honesty and integrity with yourself, you've lost the game already. But if you strive to build that consistently every day, it will become a habit, because positive habits are built just as negative habits. So if you repeat that good behavior towards your integrity and self-discipline, resilience, self-reliance, you won't lose that, and you shouldn't become delusional, because you will see what other people do that you don't agree with, and you won't take after their example. You follow your own example in all morality, ethics, right?
Yeah. Would you say that delusion is common in the world?
Yes, in many ways it is. But not only the delusion about somebody being greater than they are, but people are also delusional, which interests me more personally. They're delusional if thinking they're unable to achieve things that they actually are perfectly capable of achieving. That's another form of delusion, which is the one that I really pursue more, because I think it's plaguing society much more than the other spectrum, the overly confident. So there is a global epidemic of lack of self-esteem and self-confidence in many people.
Yeah, that's so interesting that it works both ways round. And I guess if you're deluded in that way, then this book will really help with that.
Yes, the book, I have had people already have read it like 2 or 3 times, and they come back to me and say, I'm reading it for the 3rd time now, and I keep applying more and more concepts, and my life has changed quite dramatically. And they're just astounded at how really simple it is once you apply that little principle everywhere, and you will get a better control over your entire self. I like to say you become an expert of your own life. And that's all you need to have a fantastic life.
And most deluded people don't realise they're deluded, do they? So if somebody is on that other side of it, where they have really low self-esteem, how do they switch on and realise that they perhaps need help to become confident?
That's a very good question. It depends on their cultural background. It depends on their current reality. I mean, to me, it was really the denial that I was at a dead end with music because I thought I couldn't learn anything else. And that was my delusion. And it really, I dug myself into a huge hole with that. Okay. But it was a slap on the face that came from a news that came from a friend, a common friend, that two of my professor's most talented students had switched from music, one into finance and the other one into medicine. And that was my wake-up call. So it was a life-changing event, a little message that I got over the phone when I thought, oh, wait a minute, these two are the absolute on the top of the professor's class. They were the cream of the cream in our class, always subjects of envy and admiration from all the rest. And now they're not in music anymore because they don't think they're competitive enough. What am I doing then? That was my wake-up call. Okay. And it was very difficult. I mean, it was helpful, but I appreciate it years later. At the time, it was not hard to appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems to be a common thing, doesn't it? The very best people don't have confidence.
Very important thing that you say that, because everybody thinks their situation is unique when it really isn't. Because in the grand scheme of things, we all go through life-changing events. So we really shouldn't use the uniqueness of our situation as an excuse for not making the change in our life and take 100% responsibility.
Yeah. And on the other hand as well, you sometimes get all the people that think they're amazing aren't really.
Yeah, but you can see if it's a false self-confidence. It's transparent in many, many cases, because if you really start exploring, I mean, now with the internet, you can see so much. It's like everybody's a neighbor. Basically. And yes, some people are able to maintain it very well for years, but that's only if the people around them don't really pay attention, in my experience.
So what do you think this book gives us that other books of a similar nature don't?
I think that I have organized these life aspects very well into one book. Instead of people having to go to read all about healthy life choices in many, many books, and then spiritual books, and then investment books and all that, this gives people a very solid foundation as to how to start building each life aspect. Yeah. Then they can branch out a little bit, but the most fundamental knowledge is in the book. And if they follow it very well, they will see this progress manifesting in their lives quite a bit, because I think it's very well organized. I basically wrote what I'm doing every day myself. So if it works for me, and I've never been a very fast learning person, very talented person. So I've told in several chapters, if I can do this, so can you.
Yeah, that's interesting. How's it written? Is it in the first person, like, this is what I do? Or is it just, this is what you should do kind of thing?
Depending on the context, I use stories. I use personal example, but I also use other people's stories. I use observation, and then it's in third person, plural, right? Yeah. Some people do this, other people do that. It depends on what I'm describing. I have described some interactions with my patients with relation to the chronic diseases that are reversible and they haven't reversed. So how you reverse a chronic disease that makes you an asset to the healthcare system. So why don't you reverse it and get rid of it once and forever and become your own asset and put your money elsewhere, right? That type of thing. But there is plenty of that described in the book. And again, because there are lots of topics I'm discussing, various topics. Yeah. It's a large variety of knowledge that's presented there in a system that helps you see how everything is really intimately connected in your life.
Yeah. And do you think that you could write more books after this?
I hope I don't have to, because if I have to write more books, that means I did a very poor job with this book.
That's true. But then you could do even better with the after of that book.
I could. I mean, I consult people when they need it, but I always tell them, get the book first. And then if you get questions, call me, but make sure you read it carefully, because a book is an inexpensive way to improve your life if you take it to heart. Okay. Especially something like this. It's called a practical guide for a reason. And even though the practical guide is at the end of the title, I think this is the most selling point, because it doesn't just ramble randomly about stuff. It's very concrete, very specific goal-setting strategy that people can apply in their lives and see great results.
Yeah. And what's the main message that you hope people will get from the book?
I really hope people don't indulge too much in conventional wisdom, because a lot of it is really irrelevant in the information age. And it's staggering to see how people rely on conventional wisdom, which usually is anything but wisdom. And they don't develop their own critical thinking skills and dig into their own hearts and souls to see what really, really matters to them and live by other people's opinions. That's what I'm trying to kind of break this pattern, because lots of people are still suffering practicing that way.
Well, where are all the places that we're able to find the book?
So the book, you are in the UK, the book is on my website. And the website is www.holisticselfconfidence.com, no dashes in the URL. I have a paperback, which we're working on some shipment prices for the countries outside of the United States, but the ebook is downloadable worldwide. You just need an EPUB file reader on your computer, which is freely downloadable from the internet for free if your computer doesn't have it already. So www.holisticselfconfidence.com is the website. I also have the Kindle version in Amazon, if that's easier.
It really is simple. Well, many thanks for joining us today. It's been great to have you on the show.
Likewise, Toby. Thank you so much for having me.